Welcome back to Getting Caught Up. I don't do a whole lot of politics on this podcast. I've done a little bit. RFK Jr. was on that podcast about a year ago. But hey, it's 2024. We got a presidential election coming up. So for this episode, we're talking a little politics. And I might do a few more episodes based around politics in the coming weeks. But for this one, I had a chance to talk with Tricia McLaughlin, who is a political strategist. Most recently, she was the press secretary and senior advisor to Vivek Ramaswamy. You may have also seen Tricia on television. She sometimes appears on various networks as a political analyst / pundit, giving her thoughts on the 2024 race because she has a unique perspective as a strategist and advisor to a campaign. In fact, Tricia was the first campaign staffer Vivek hired weeks before he officially launched his presidential campaign. She started out there working in Vivek's basement. So we talked all about that whole experience, the grueling work schedule, what it took to get a candidate who didn't really have a tremendous amount of name recognition when the campaign started, and how by the first Republican debate, he was at the center of the stage because he was polling so well. Tricia talked about how they used social media to amplify Vivek's message. I also asked her whether there was any advice she ever gave to Vivek that he simply didn't follow. And there was a pretty big example that she talked about that actually made some news at the time. She also told some interesting stories about being in Iowa during the lead up to the Iowa caucuses and how the weather was a major factor. It snowed there for about a week straight, and there was a blizzard right before the caucuses happened. She told a story about getting stuck on the side of the road in the heavy snow. We also talked about some of the other work she's done in the past, working on Ohio Governor Mike DeWine's re-election campaign in 2022, as well as some of her work as a political appointee at the State Department in the Trump administration. And we got into a discussion of the 2024 race, less than 6 months from Election Day. We talked about the Veep stakes, how she would advise Trump if she were strategizing for him. I also asked her about the RFK Jr. factor, whether he'll be a spoiler in the 2024 race, and if so, will he be a spoiler for Biden or for Trump? She's a fascinating person to talk with. Quick reminder, please like, comment on, or share this episode to help its visibility so I can keep bringing you interviews with interesting people like Tricia. Tricia also told me about how she just launched a new firm focusing on political strategy for candidates. So let's get right to it. I talked to her from her home state of Ohio. Here she is, political strategist and former Vivek Ramaswamy press secretary, Tricia McLaughlin. Tricia McLaughlin, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this. It's great to meet you. Good to see you here. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, it's great. It's great to speak with you. I wanted to speak to you mainly because your experiences with Vivek Ramaswamy's campaign, which just ended, I guess, about 2 months ago now. You were really active on that campaign, not just as his press secretary and senior advisor, but you were on Twitter. I saw you tangling with people all the time. In fact, one of the things that initially caught my attention to you was you were tangling with a friend of mine, which is Dave Rubin. And this is going back. I know you're laughing at that. This is going back to maybe June of last year or something like that.
Yeah.
June of 2023. I think Dave and Vivek had some issues. They were, I don't even know what it was, but I saw you getting in on it. And I was like, I was actually laughing about it. I talked to Dave about it too. So what happened there? What was that about?
It was about a hate speech law out of Florida. So of course, Dave Rubin lives in Florida and he's a fan of the governor's. And Vivek's position on it was that it was encroaching. I mean, there's right a line between threatening speech and free speech, right? Sometimes that line gets a little bit blurry. And Vivek's argument was, this is actually, you can say sick and horrible things, but you do have the right to say it. And Vivek felt strongly that this was infringing on the free speech aspect versus Dave felt like this was protecting against, anti-Semitic hate and threatening speech maybe towards especially the Jewish community. So honestly, the specifics are a little blurry to me now.
Yeah.
Yes, that was kind of my first. I mean, I was the first person on Vivek Ramaswamy's campaign. And
Really?
I was, yeah. So, that's early on where that was, I think, in June to your point. But we were mixing it up a little bit. I actually think Dave Rubin is, I enjoy watching his podcast. I have for a long time. So we definitely got in a little bit of a skirmish. I think he thought I was just like this Vivek Ramaswamy troll, like had no affiliation with the campaign, but I was speaking on Vivek's behalf at the time. So no bad blood on my end. I would think none on his either.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I think they've obviously patched things up. I saw Vivek was on his show, the Rubin Report, maybe, I don't know, 3, 4 weeks ago, something
Yeah.
like that. But yeah, I think, I mean, when I saw it, I knew it was, you weren't just some random person like, elbowing into the conversation. I thought that was kind of obvious, but it was just interesting to see. And like I said, we were actually talking before we started recording about New York City, and that's where I met. I go way back with Dave all the way to New York City. Speaking of living on the Upper West Side, where I was living at the time, that's where Dave lived. Dave lived at 84th in Amsterdam, and so we used to walk all around, Seinfeld territory.
Oh, that's awesome.
But so that's really interesting. You were the first employee on Vivek's staff. That is fascinating. How did that come about, and what was it like when it was just you and him?
Yeah. I mean, we were working out of his basement for at least the first 3 weeks of the campaign. End of January, I had just left Governor Mike DeWine, which I'm from Ohio, Vivek's from Ohio. We're actually from the same city in Cincinnati, which is where I am now visiting family. But I had met Vivek at some sort of a political conference in Ohio, and we had gone back and forth on this op-ed he was writing. This is years ago at this point, and we kind of continued a friendship. He was starting Strive, and I connected with him with some people who I thought might be good, and some of them stayed at that firm. And so we kind of continued a relationship there. And then when he said he was looking to get involved politically, and we had a conversation. I went to his house, and he said he was running for president, which at the time a lot of people didn't know who Vivek Ramaswamy was. They might have been familiar with Woke Inc. or some of the ideas, but that name recognition wasn't there. So at the time, it felt like a major leap of faith, and I'm so glad I did it. But I mean, those first few weeks, I think I started on like January 31st, and then he announced on February 21st. So, I mean, we had no infrastructure at all. He brought on Ben Yoho, who ultimately was his, general consultant and campaign strategist all in one. Who's a great guy, but that was we were very much at the basement level, literally, actually.
Yeah, literally in his basement. Now, did you have any reservations about the lack of name recognition? Because I think I'd heard of Vivek too at that point, but I wasn't really that aware of who he was and what he was about. Did you have any reservations about that being a huge challenge, trying to just get people educated on who exactly he was?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I mean, that was actually my first question is, I mean, we all knew, of course, Donald Trump had already announced, and the behemoth that is Donald Trump, and then Ron DeSantis, another Florida governor, most probably recognizable governor in the country at that time, was largely rumored. And then Nikki Haley was there. There's so many major names who have been in politics for decades. And I remember, I think probably the first or second thing I asked Vivek is, how you have zero name ID. How are you going to get your name ID up? And he said, well, that would be your job. So
Yeah. So
I took him up on the offer.
What was your initial take on how to do that then?
I mean, the initial take, I didn't know quite what my role would be when I joined the campaign. I mean, we were talking about something like press secretary. I had been communications director for Mike DeWine and had some communications experience in the Trump administration, but we hadn't gotten into specifics on what my role would exactly be, because at that point we were doing everything. But I mean, I think we both knew inherently he just had to be everywhere all the time, and that was exactly the strategy that we employed.
So that, I think, that's a great way to put it, because I feel like that's what it was, at least on social media. I feel like he was posting almost constantly, all sorts of posts. Even, I mean, I remember one of him playing tennis at one point. I think he was shirtless playing tennis. And so I'm
Yeah,
wondering,
right
like,
before the first debate. Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought that was actually a pretty wise move. I'm not sure if that was before or after RFK Jr. had posted like a shirtless photo of him like bench pressing at Muscle Beach in Santa Monica, but I thought it was good. Anything to get, like you're saying, get that name recognition out there, introduce himself to people. I think play up his young factor. He's obviously the youngest by far of all the well, I guess DeSantis is relatively young as well.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, Vivek was only 37 when he announced, 38 by
yeah,
the end of the campaign. So he was incredibly, I mean, he was even younger than Pete Buttigieg on the Democrat side, who was seen as a baby. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So was that social media strategy sort of something that was really choreographed on your end, or did he just sort of go at it and say, like, I'm just going to be myself on social media?
I mean, I think it was both. I mean, for anyone to act like Vivek was not the visionary behind his social media would be inherently false. He was, I mean, he's very attuned to what his base and what conservatives and just young people in general are looking for. And I mean, I think at first it was by necessity, right? We were not getting the attention that these other major presidential candidates were getting. And so, I mean, how did we, when he was getting the TV hits that we wanted, or whether they be big or small, how are we going to amplify them so everyone would see it? And that was through social media. And I think, I will say, I think that this campaign with Vivek's vision kind of changed the game. I mean, just speed and sheer volume. We were doing a tweet, I would say, at least once or twice an hour, 15 hours a day. I mean, that was from February, I would say, right after he announced until really the campaign ended. And a lot of those were Vivek's, like just his thoughts, right? He does a lot of text only, those really long form tweets. And then some of them were his podcasts. I mean, his own podcasts, other people's podcasts, other people's shows. It was across the gambit. I mean, he gave us a lot of content to put out there, but we had a very small, nimble team who, I mean, cut, clipped, and got it out there in really record time. And I'm proud of that team for doing so.
Yeah, that was amazing to watch. I mean, I would see, I don't watch a lot of cable news. I imagine a lot of people don't watch much anymore, but I feel like he was on cable news a lot, and I saw all of his appearances. And maybe didn't even see all of them, but I just saw the really most relevant parts of them, which I think is a success in order to get that. And often I would see too, they'd have like millions of views. Once Elon Musk changed Twitter to show the views, those were really getting a lot of amplification on Twitter. So that was
Yeah.
interesting. So at what point was the campaign starting to grow then? I mean, obviously you had to add some more people. It couldn't just be you and Vivek in his basement, right?
Yeah, we brought on, gosh, I mean, it definitely took some time. I think it was this summer that it really started to kind of come together. I mean, we did have a digital director who was, me, digital director, and a deputy that was kind of, we were running the whole comms and digital show. And then we brought on, I would say, two more people in the comms digital space in late summer. And then from there, it was like a handful more. So yeah, it was a labor of love, to say the least.
And how does that compare to other campaigns you've worked on? Like you said, you worked for Governor DeWine's reelection campaign. I think that was in 2022, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And so was this a vastly different experience than that?
Completely different. I mean, Governor DeWine is a great guy. I mean, he was an incumbent at the time, so I think inherently that's different. But as well, he had infrastructure built, right? So many of these guys, whether it be Governor DeSantis or Nikki Haley or pretty much Tim Scott, you name it, they've had, you know, decades of experience where they've built teams. They've kind of had the ability to vet people as far as I know that this person's a great leader. I know that this person is great in the tech space. I know this person's a great field director. And they're able to then put together the best team, the creme de la creme, and then move forward. And those people have typically already worked together before, or at least most of them for the most part. And this was completely different. This was starting, like we said, basement level, people who have never worked together before, most of whom have never worked on presidential campaigns, myself included. I'd done one other campaign, but I had not done that before. So it was, in some ways, it brought out a lot of new ways of thinking, right? Vivek's the first time presidential candidate. He's not going to fall into, oh, we do this. This is how it's typically done. Well, why? I mean, he asked the why. Why is it typically done this way? And we didn't, I would say that was an advantage of having a first time candidate and lacking that infrastructure. But I will say, I mean, I think if you don't, Vivek complains about the political class a lot, and I think that's understandable. And then there's so many drawbacks to it, but it does bring you got to really catch up if you don't have an infrastructure already built.
Yeah. It almost sounds like you're describing a startup environment.
Completely. It was just a startup environment. That's exactly which Vivek is familiar with.
Yeah, I was going to say he's no stranger to that. And I think too, it sort of proves what he did, at least the success he had. And he's not the only one, I think, but it sort of proves you don't need to do that sort of traditional campaign that has all the infrastructure or has this infrastructure in a certain way, designed in a certain way, I should say.
Yeah.
And do you like that? Is that how, let's say you someday are hired to work on another campaign? Is that something that you'll look at or even consider before taking a job, or is that something you would bring to it? More of a
yeah. I think absolutely. I mean, I started a firm recently, so I think Vivek is fantastic at he is a builder, and he's always has the startup mentality, and he demands people around him to have the same. And I think that it's almost a learned skill set as far as like the answers are not right in front of me. No one has done this before in this way, and kind of being able to chart your own path. But I mean, it brings major benefits. And I think, of course, do we get the result we wanted on January 15th? Absolutely not. But I think he changed the way that campaigns are run.
Yeah. You said you started your own firm. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a communications and political consulting firm. So I started in about 3 weeks ago, and handful of clients so far. It's going well, and yeah, I've been enjoying a little bit more freedom than I think a 7-day a week, 18-hour day campaign brings you.
Yeah, congratulations on starting that. And I wanted to ask you about that too. Vivek's campaign also seemed like it was like pedal to the metal all the time. Was that a grind? Did that wear on you at all, or wear on other people? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely it did, but it absolutely increases your work ethic. Just, I mean, even now I'm thinking, okay, like what's next? What do I have to do? Because you're become wired to be working 7 days a week, 18-hour days. I mean, I remember the other campaigns. I remember hearing about the staffers going to the beach or going on vacation. And we're thinking like, we're grinding 7 days a week. Where do these guys have the time? But I do think that, of course, that was a benefit. These other candidates had the name ID. They didn't have really this startup so much as we had. I mean, people didn't know who Vivek Ramaswamy was, and then they couldn't pronounce his name. And then suddenly by the end of the summer, we found he was at the center of the debate stage. And I mean, that was all blood, sweat, and tears, and Vivek's brilliance and messaging, and often policy too.
Yeah. Now, were you on the campaign trail with him as well?
Yes. So at the very start of the campaign, pretty much everyone, including our campaign manager, all the senior staff was with him. It was almost like this was his traveling office, whether it be his plane or the campaign bus. So that was, we were traveling probably 6 or 7 days a week. So in many ways that was great, because we had a lot of time for anything from debate prep. We were doing things in person to really starting to understand each other and sync up and be able to kind of really be Vivek's liaison with whether it be press or staff or folks we're managing. But obviously it's difficult to do real work on a campaign bus or on an airplane. So we eventually, by the end, I would say probably October, I got a fantastic press secretary, Caroline Sunshine, and she really took over a lot of the traveling for me.
And then what did you do at that point? Sort of fall into more of that senior advisor role?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it was, really you're in complete campaign gear as far as the press are as well. And Vivek was just much better known. So, I mean, the team was bigger, so management became an even more important function. And you're starting to focus on other things too, right? Ground game, more local press. Everything becomes a little bit more pressing.
Were there times, any times at all, that you thought that Vivek maybe like went too far with something or did something that you wouldn't necessarily recommend or wouldn't recommend another candidate to do?
Yes, and he definitely would know. Um,
Like,
I guess,
give me an example of one of those times. I guess
yeah,
you told him
sure.
that, so I'm sure it's
Yes.
nothing new to him if he
No,
happened
nothing.
to hear
Yeah.
this.
Um, and I think this is actually pretty public as well, is when over late summer, Vivek had brought up in one of his speeches that he would essentially move the voting age. Um,
Yes.
depending on if, right, somebody took a civics test that
Yeah.
immigrants pass, or if um, there would just be different qualifications. So you could vote or serving in the military,
Right.
some parameters, but largely
I thought first responders too, right? Was
first
the
responders, yes, yes. So there's a number of different ways you could vote, but if not, you would move the voting age to 25. And I mean, politically, that's tough, especially with a demographic of young people who
right.
Vivek was really starting to corral. So, I very much voiced I did not think that this was the approach we should take. And I know a number of other folks on our team did as well, but that actually kind of came out in the press later anyway. There was a Politico story saying that even even the staffers didn't like this idea, which was true. And Vivek was actually pretty transparent with this reporter saying like, yeah, my team hates this, but this is what I believe, and I'm doing it anyway. So I think we took some hits for that, but I always think for staff, you give your best advice, you voice your disagreement if you disagree, but you're not the candidate. So at the end of the day, you got to execute, and if you can't do that, then you need to show yourself the door, and maybe you should run for office yourself, because the only way you're really gonna have all your opinions fully agreed to is if you're running yourself.
Right. And that's interesting. I mean, Vivek is the candidate, right? So if he wants to do it, he can do it. Now he takes your advice. How does he then tell all of you, oh no, I'm going ahead with this. I hear all of you that you don't like it, but I'm going ahead with it. Does he say that or did he just
I think pretty much just like that. I hear
yeah.
you, but you'll listen. I think that one in particular took a couple of weeks, which is, he mulled it over, but I think ultimately he made the call.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's also interesting you brought that one up because I have a 15-year-old son. I talked to my son and asked him about what he thought of Vivek Ramaswamy. And he's like, and keep in mind, he's 15, right? He's like, oh, I don't like that guy. I'm like, oh, why not? I'm like, what is it, the voting age thing? And he was like, what? What's that? And so I told him, I was like, well, he wants to raise the voting age to 25. In most cases, there's some, you know,
Exceptions and
yeah, some exceptions, military people, first responders, etc. And he was like, oh, I love that idea. So, and now he's under voting age, right?
yeah,
But I couldn't believe that he actually liked that idea,
yeah.
which was really counterintuitive. So I wonder if Vivek just had he had tapped into something about
We saw
younger
that
folks.
actually a lot in Iowa. Of course, we were predominantly in Iowa and New Hampshire, so I can't really speak for the rest of the country. But as far as applause lines, if we go to somewhere with a younger audience, that was a huge applause line. And I think I have something Vivek did on this issue really changed my mind on is I do think that people are hungry for more of that civic duty.
Yeah.
And while maybe I disagree on the tactic, I think young people in particular, they want to feel like they have skin in the game. And maybe he, to your point, he really tapped into something there. It was shockingly to me though, with even the people who were under 18, it was a major applause line. So
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a little shocking to me too. I'm older. I like that idea kind of a little bit, just on its face. But I would have thought, no way. And I was really, when he came out with that, I was really surprised because he is younger. And I was like, man, he's probably got a head start with younger voters. And then to try to do this, which could be seen as alienating, but maybe they liked it. It's interesting. Younger people today too. They don't seem to want to drive as soon. Nobody's in a rush to get a driver's license like they were years ago and so forth. So maybe some of that is playing into it too.
yeah.
Um,
We
yeah.
saw something similar though with social media. So one of Vivek's policy proposals is that you should ban social media for kids under 15 or 16, which I, by the way, completely agree with. But I also, based on the conversations we were having on the trail with young people, I don't think that they actually want to be on social media. I think that they understand how toxic it is, how divisive it is. I mean, how harmful it is to their mental health. But because their friends are on it or their peers, they don't want to miss out. No one wants to uh,
Yes.
be left out of a world that everyone's a part of. But if that world doesn't exist yet until you're 15, 16, then I mean, it could solve a lot of problems.
Absolutely. I mean, there's tremendous amount of peer pressure to be on social media. I know that I have three kids, 15, 14, and 9. And my 14-year-old loves social media and he would completely disagree with you on that. But my 15-year-old, I don't think he would disagree with you. I think he might actually like it if social media didn't start till 16 or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah. I wanted to ask you too about the one of his other big ideas that I thought was sort of, almost a little crazy, you could say, but I liked it, and that was abolishing the FBI. What do you think about that one? Is that another one that got some pushback internally?
I think in the wake of everything that happened with Donald Trump, as far as the weaponization of the Justice Department, the weaponization of the FBI, continually really nefarious information coming out, especially in the testimonies over the summer. Most of our team was fully on board with this. I mean, does it sound on its face shutting down the FBI? It does. It sounds extreme. I think we can both admit that. I think advocates would say, yeah, that sounds extreme. And I think immediately we were, pummeled with questions about, well, what about, sex traffickers, or what about people who are abusing children? Like, what are the implications? And I think something Vivek did so brilliantly is that, I mean, you probably remember this, he broke down how he would reorganize the FBI
Yes.
using the US Marshals, using different entities so that the vital functions were taken care of, but that to really eliminate some of the toxicity and weaponization of law enforcement is hopefully stripped from these institutions.
Yeah, I think too. Even and I don't know what you think of its, whether it could. Let's say Vivek went on and was elected president, whether that would even be achievable or not. But one thing I liked about it is it just forces the conversation about the problems that we've seen arise with law enforcement and so forth. And I don't think it's just the FBI; it's probably other aspects of the Justice Department. So, did you think that that something like that would be achievable though?
I mean, I think Vivek's been pretty specific as far as like, yes, this would likely get tied up in the courts, but with West Virginia versus EPA, that Supreme Court ruling shows the pathway that this is unconstitutional to have this degree of bureaucracy. So, I mean, do I think it would get tied up in the courts? Likely, but I mean, as far as how the courts are stacked right now, it would be pretty advantageous. So maybe it's, shooting for the stars to say they would actually shut down the FBI. But if you reach the moon, that's probably pretty good if we got some serious reform.
Yes, true. And just even if you reduce the overall size of the FBI, if that's the end result, that's probably a win. Or he could take that as a win. Let me ask you this. Talking about Vivek, obviously out of the race, but he's been very much in Trump's orbit now. What do you think about his possibilities of becoming Trump's running mate? It looks like Trump was down to like maybe a final four, and it doesn't seem to include Vivek. I'm kind of surprised by that. What's your take on that?
Yeah, Veep stakes. It feels like that's all people are talking about these days. But I mean, I think that Vivek would want to serve in any capacity he thinks like is best for the country. So it's very difficult to predict what Donald Trump will do. I'm hearing a lot of different names, but I mean, honestly, I think no one knows but Donald Trump, and maybe I don't know what the timeline for his announcement is, but he might not even know.
Yeah, I think he said sometime, he said maybe sometime before the convention this
Yeah.
summer. Um, let me ask you this way then. If you were advising Donald Trump, let's say you were on his campaign as a senior advisor, how would you advise him to choose a running mate?
Yeah, I mean, I think Vivek is an excellent choice as far as, I mean, he's incredibly bright, incredibly talented. He's fearless as far as taking down the media and deep state as well. And I think that Trump does need someone in his corner like that. But as far as there's a lot of great options, and I think we're afforded a very deep bench as conservatives, so that's fortunate. I mean, one of the first things I think about is that you need somebody who's strong and loyal, but you also need somebody. I think somebody who can speak well on abortion is important. The Democrats are going to try and make this entire election about the issue. I think they'll make it about abortion and about Trump's trials. And there's not a lot you can do with a VP about Trump's trials. With that, you need somebody who's, again, can take on the media and is incredibly loyal. But as far as with the issue of abortion, you need someone who can really speak about it well and swat down some of these attacks and really smears that are going to come out from the left.
So one person who was at least seen to have taken that topic on pretty well was Nikki Haley. What do you think about her? She hasn't endorsed Trump. In fact, she's still on the ballot and is even getting votes. Like in Pennsylvania, a couple of weeks ago, she got, I think, something like 10% of the vote. I can't remember the exact number, but somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Do you think that she could be a running mate of Trump? I mean, it got pretty ugly between the two of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump's always willing to let bygones be bygones, it seems, especially if it would, help him win the race. In this case, I don't think it would necessarily help him win the race. And I also think the fact that she hasn't come out and endorsed him yet, the race is over. So, I mean, let's all corral around who the nominee is. I would be surprised if that were the choice, but who knows? This is politics.
Let me ask you about one other woman too, and that is Tulsi Gabbard, who is a former Democrat. I guess she's independent now. What do you think about her? Do you think A, she'd be a good candidate as a running mate, and B, do you think it's very possible, or is that just like kind of a long shot?
She seemed like she was in the name of that short list that you were referencing. It's a little hard for me to picture a person who just ran in 2020 to be the Democratic nominee, to be the vice president for Donald Trump. But I mean, electorally, it definitely could be beneficial. I think she's been very strong and prescient on a lot of the foreign policy ideas. So who knows? It could be hers, but I think I don't know a lot about their relationship, and I know loyalty definitely matters to Trump. So I think it depends how quickly can they build a relationship, and is the trust there?
I don't know. I mean, she, you know, like you said, was running to be running for president as a Democrat 4 years ago. But the one thing is too, we're also in very topsy turvy times. Like, kind of nothing makes sense anymore. So in that sense, I wouldn't really be surprised. But
Yeah, agree with
um,
you.
yeah, who
It's
knows?
anyone's game at this point.
Yeah. So let's talk about your history a little bit too. Before you started working for Governor DeWine, you were working at the State Department and the Treasury Department. That seems like a world of difference from working in political campaigns. Am I right there?
It was a world of difference. Yeah. So I had started out in finance, completely unrelated to the world of politics. And actually, I was doing that in your hometown of Philly, or right outside. So I did
Whereabouts?
at JP Morgan.
Yeah, but like where in Philly or where are
So
they?
the office itself was in Delaware, but I was living in Philly.
Right, right. Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
So, but that all aside, I mean, this is 2016, very contentious election. I mean, I'm impressed with anyone who said that they were going to predict Donald Trump would win because I absolutely did not. But after the election, I had been in contact with some folks I had known from, interning in college and someone who was going to be working at the Treasury Department. So started out there and kind of climbed my way up the ladder. Ultimately was overseeing public affairs for the terrorist financing intelligence portfolio. So things with economic sanctions, it's kind of a big topic now as far as things with Iran. We were doing maximum pressure campaigns on Iran and then Russia actually as well, which is kind of crazy because the Trump administration's given absolutely no credit for those sanctions regimes when I think that it shows today how effective they were as far as we weren't at war. Iran did not have half the coffers. And I mean,
Correct. With what's
really,
going on in the world
yeah.
today, you can tell like Russia went and invaded Ukraine.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
and that's just one, right? That's just one lever in the
sure.
national security arsenal. But I mean, the US dollar in our economy, people want access. People want access to the market. And so I mean, that's an essential tool. And I think the Biden administration completely squandered that. But that's a total aside. So from there, I was at the Treasury Department for probably 3 years and change. And then the final year of the Trump administration, I went over to the State Department and I was Chief of Staff for Nuclear Arms Control. So one of the assistant secretaries at Treasury went over and was presidential envoy to Trump, working on this nuclear arms control deal called New START. You might be familiar. It's between the U.S. and Russia. That ultimately they extended it under Biden. We had other plans, but that's what happened. And then I kind of caught the political bug a little bit and, wanted to cut my teeth there, went back to Ohio, which has always been electorally pretty important, and wanted to see family. And that's kind of how that happened.
And then ended up working for the governor's reelection. Yeah. Just going back to your time at the State Department and Treasury Department, essentially, I mean, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're a bureaucrat at that point of your life. Is that an
No,
accurate way
so
to just?
no, I was a political appointee.
Oh, you
So
were okay.
yes, so my I was in the Trump administration. So my
So you're
job
saying when
started.
Trump was out of office, that ended your job?
Yes, that ends your job.
Got
Yes,
it.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was political appointee or just, government bureaucrat.
Bureaucrat.
And then
Yeah,
you
yeah.
started, yeah, that's interesting. And did
Wouldn't
you?
that be crazy if I was a government bureaucrat and then I was working for Vivek Ramaswamy, who said he would?
Yes, well, that's kind of where I was going with that. That's a radical change. And I wondered what, was there something in those jobs that sort of drove you to the polar opposite, essentially?
No, and I can't say that. I would say, being especially at the State Department, Treasury is a little bit leaner, but State Department is so bloated, and there really is so much, truly just an unhinged amount of bureaucracy. I mean, it only gave teeth farther to what Vivek was saying because it was, I mean, it was almost in some degrees people almost creating jobs for themselves, probably because they had nothing better to do.
So how would you rate that overall experience? Was it good? Did you enjoy it? Let's say Trump had won in 2020 and would you have stayed on in something like that? Or do you think you would
Yeah.
have gotten into, political strategy also?
No, I think that foreign policy was always kind of something I was still remain very interested in. We'll see what happens, if there's another Donald Trump or Republican in office one day. I would love to pursue something in the foreign policy realm again. It's something I really loved. Coming back to Ohio, it's not a big job market for nuclear arms control, so it made more sense for me to go back into politics, which I'm also interested in. But yeah, I mean, I loved those jobs. I learned so much about how the government operates, but also, uh, how the national security, how national security decisions are formed, and the different input, and counterintelligence, intelligence. It was fascinating. So I'm very grateful.
In your role, did you have like a security clearance or anything? Were you getting intel reports?
Yeah.
And what can you is there anything you can tell me about that? Is what did we see uh during those years? I guess you're talking between 2017, 2019, roughly, or 2020. Um, what was the world like at that point? What were the threats to the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're probably not much different from where they are today. I think that part of the reason um, I think it was a lot of Donald Trump's policies that actually brought really peace. I think Iran, right? That was
Yeah.
kind of for at least 3 years, I would say that was kind of in the rear view mirror. Like, oh, no one's really talking about that anymore. I mean, we weren't talking about Islamic extremism,
Yeah.
which I think now we are again. As far as Russia, I mean, of course, people were talking Russia, Russia, Russia as far as Russian collusion, but the reality was much different as far as we were actually putting maximum sanctions on these Russian oligarchs and those associated with Putin. And then what Biden's been in office, and
Yeah.
we're really at war on multiple fronts, and the globe was just so much more tension and perilous.
Yeah. The the invasion of Ukraine to me was striking because it seemed to happen so fast into Biden's presidency, 1 year basically, and you think that that's because of why? Do you think it was more the way Putin views Biden as a leader, or was it more to the things you're describing now, the sanctions? Were they lifted? What happened there? What
Yes,
changed? Yeah.
yes. So the sanctions were lifted on Iran, and actually because we had left the JCPOA, and basically Biden was begging, or Biden's administration, without any constraints, was just begging them to come back to the negotiating table. So I mean, if you coming at our adversaries in a position of weakness, then I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you're gonna get people who are testing you, and that's exactly I think what Putin did, and I think the Ayatollah as well in Iran is doing as well. I don't think we would have these issues and these wars if Donald Trump were in the White House, but that's where we're at today. Actually, when I think of what happened with Ukraine, I kind of think of the what was on the opposite end of the scale when all the American hostages were released from Iran right after Reagan was elected. I mean, I think if you posture with strength and you show your word means something and don't just say don't, people typically listen. They don't want to mess with the United States if you are approaching foreign policy from a position of strength.
It almost sounds like you're saying two things. Then you're saying that the position, the actual policies that you have, but even do you think that Biden is seen as just like from a personality standpoint, does he seem weak? Um,
I think so, and I think that those surrounding him as well.
yeah, I mean,
Coming
because
to the negotiating table, like begging someone to come to the negotiating
yeah,
table. It's
yeah, because say what you want about Trump. I mean, he would get on Twitter and taunt people, taunt world leaders. I think he was doing that to multiple world leaders. He certainly did it to Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Um, so I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there's some um, method
madmen.
to that madness. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so you might go back into that depending on what happens with the election coming up.
In God's hands, right?
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you too, since we're talking about the election. I've been watching the Biden campaign, obviously, and I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on some of the things they're doing as a political strategist, because that's really what you've been doing most recently. I think one thing that struck me, I sent you these clips. Biden showed up on Howard Stern, which was kind of a surprise for him to show up there for an interview. And then a couple days later, Kamala Harris shows up on Drew Barrymore's show, and I was struck by the fact that they were they were both, in both cases, the hosts were trying to push them as the father. Howard Stern kept repeatedly calling Joe Biden the father of the country. And then there was the really awkward thing where Drew Barrymore said that, we needed a mamala. We need like a mom of the country. And she called Kamala Harris mamala. Let's take a quick look at that clip right now.
The reason I'm so excited to talk to you was because I wanted to understand the tragedy in your life and how you dealt with it. And you're the kind of leader I love, because we're lucky to have you in the Oval Office and serving as the father of the country. Because if you're a good father to your family, which you are, I know you'd be a good father to the country. And I want to thank you for providing a calming influence, an organized administration post-COVID, getting that vaccine out.
I've been thinking that we really all need a tremendous hug in the world right now. Yeah. But in our country, we need you to be mamala of the country.
What is your thought on that? Do you think that was intentional? Are these talking points that are being distributed by the Biden campaign to Stern and to Drew Barrymore, or is this just some weird coincidence?
They were so close together. It would be hard for me to believe it's a coincidence. And I do think, you see it on social media all the time as far as these different left-leaning influencers or media figures have very similar talking points. And I think, to the Biden administration and the campaign's credit, they are pretty calculated. As far as the mamala, I almost can't lay that at Kamala Harris's feet because it was just so cringeworthy from Drew Barrymore. I thought Secret Service would have to get involved for how close she was getting to her. But and with the Howard Stern piece too, I think there's a couple things going on. They're trying to combat the discussion about Joe Biden's age, right? That's completely a vulnerability for him. If people think he's incapacitated in some way, they want to reframe it. Not that I'm trying to think of who said it in an interview. Maybe it was Elizabeth Warren or someone recently, but said that his age is actually this major asset. Yeah. It was Jill Biden. That's who it was. His age is a major asset.
So to those who say I can't vote for Joe Biden, he's too old, what do you say?
I say his age is an asset.
And I think we all know that was, again, bringing up Reagan, that was a vulnerability for Reagan in his race, and he brilliantly put the kibosh to that. But I think that's probably similar here. They're trying to reframe that he's this paternal father figure, and probably the same with Mamala. But I think that there's something, a little bit deeper here as well, is I think there's kind of this psychosis in the left of the country, and it's almost this need for a nanny state, a big brother type. Yes. And it's, I think as conservatives, we view, right, our rights are inherited from God, not from the state. We look to our parents for guidance. We don't look to the government. So it's kind of just this backwards way of looking at things. And I do think it shows a psychological division in the country.
Yes, that's interesting you put it that way. So for one thing, I'm not a conservative, so I don't really view it from that perspective, right? But I do see this sort of, if this is a strategy from that campaign, it strikes me as they're almost infantilizing American voters. And as an American voter, I don't want another mom and dad. I just want an executive who can be competent and not sell out the country, Is that, do you think that's what's really going on here? That there's some weird psycho drama with voters?
It might not be, I don't know if it's just an easy catchphrase for the Biden administration to kind of pick up on that, people are kind of looking for these paternal figures or maternal figures, but it seems people keep on saying it, so there's something there. Yeah.
I wonder if they're sort of road testing it in those places, to see what the response is. Obviously, the response was, there was just so much blowback on the Mamala one. The Stern one, I didn't see as much about it, but I listened to the whole Stern interview. I've been listening to Howard Stern for decades, right? Okay. And I just, as part of I don't really listen to him much anymore because I feel like he's not what he used to be. But he's got the president. I'm going to listen to that. And I listened to it and I felt almost like he didn't even believe what he was saying. Like I've heard Howard Stern be Howard Stern, and I just felt like those words had sort of been put into his mouth. And I don't know. So maybe it's some sort of like test run. They, do a trial balloon, and if it doesn't get shot down, they keep going with it,
Yeah. Yeah.
What else about the campaign? I mean, obviously the age thing. Do you really think age is an issue for candidates? Because Trump is not young.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily age, but age if you seem like you're not cognitively up to the task. I mean, I don't think that, how many years apart are Joe Biden and Donald Trump? Like 3 years?
I think 4 years. I think Trump is 77 and Biden's 81. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, the age gap, I would think it seems like it's at least 10 to 15. I mean, Trump does, I mean, love him or hate him, he does exude energy. It doesn't
Yes.
look like he's struggling versus I think most people would argue Biden does seem like an elderly man. I don't think that the special counsel's report was helpful at all as far as saying that he was something like he's a well-meaning older man with a bad memory, and that doesn't engender trust with voters, especially with what they can see with their own ears and their own eyes. As far as it does look like he often gaffes, he often looks like he's struggling for words. Sometimes he doesn't know which way to get off the stage. I think we see this in our everyday lives with maybe parents or grandparents who are getting older. We know the signs of aging, especially cognitively.
Yeah. So it's not the age, the number, but it's really just his state of competency, I guess, right? Is what you're saying. I kind of think the same thing. I mean, I generally believe I'd rather have a sort of an older president, sort of, because like, I don't know, you just have more wisdom the older you get to some degree, right? Then at some point, other factors start impinging upon that, I guess. The polling right now for Biden is not great. I've seen probably in the last 2 weeks separate polls that have shown him trailing Trump in 6 of the 7 battleground states or 7 of the 7 battleground states. What do you think about that? Do you think it's as somebody who's been on a campaign, is it too early to pay attention to these polls? Is this like dire stuff for his campaign?
I think it's too early to really be paying attention. Is it a positive harbinger for Joe Biden? No, it's absolutely not. And I mean, I think especially with some of these demographics that they've typically been relying on, the Black vote, the Hispanic vote, the young vote, I mean, that should be a 3-alarm fire as far as you need to meet these young people where they're at, or these other minority groups, because they seem to be going in a different direction. I mean, I think, of course, as well with the Palestine-Israel issue, we saw it in Michigan during the primary. That's going to be very tough on the Biden camp and trying to thread that needle.
And you mentioned young voters, and that's sort of a good segue into the next topic here, which is RFK Jr. RFK Jr. is tremendously popular with these younger voters. It's unbelievable almost if you look at some of the polling. He's actually polling ahead of both Trump and Biden with like under 29, 18 to 29, I think. And then surprisingly, you would think that the old people who actually know who the Kennedys are, they really don't like him that much. That's like his lowest number. So what do you think about RFK Jr.? Do you think he's a spoiler? If he is a spoiler, who is he a spoiler for?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think Republicans right now love to, lull themselves with the idea that, oh, he's just taken from Biden. He's like you said, he's a Kennedy, so he's easily identified with Democrats. I don't think that's true. I think he's taking votes from everyone. And I think both, we definitely need to wake up to that fact on the conservative side. That all being said, I think that there's such low information out there about who Bobby Kennedy actually is and what he actually stands for. I think people think of him as like this hip, fit, iconoclast, kind of like, black sheep of the family. He's going to go run as an independent, kind of like this, cool renegade vibe. And I think people need to actually look at what does he stand for. I mean, as far as he's called like the NRA a terrorist organization, and he's, has very strong, pretty big government beliefs as far as climate change goes. So I just think it's people love, these interesting novelty candidates, but I think that I would encourage everyone to go look at what he actually stands for.
So you think too early to tell who he's going to be a spoiler for, if at all? Do you think he's got any shot at winning this thing at all, or is that just ridiculous?
Yeah, I think that would be pretty crazy. But I do think that he has the ability to change the course of the race, and he probably has the ability to change some of the conversation. I think that he probably has with Ukraine, and but he does often apologize, and I would, if I were his senior advisor, I would tell him to stop apologizing, because he almost, anytime he comes out with a controversial opinion, he then walks it back. And if he wants to garner any,
Yeah.
serious votes or serious attention, he needs to, you got to own. I mean, you can't run for president and not be okay with controversy.
Now, about a week ago or so, maybe not even a week ago, we're taping this in early May, but the Wall Street Journal had a story out about his campaign. And basically they painted it as like total chaos inside, people who are only there to just raise their own profile more than, work toward his election. There was a bunch of other stuff that was flying around. It sounded, if you read that story, it sounds like what a crazy place. How are they even getting the polling numbers that they are? What's your take on that as a campaign insider? How would you advise people to read that story? Take it with a grain of salt, or I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think any of these palace intrigue stories you take with a grain of salt. I mean, I know, of people who've worked on that campaign, and I've heard similar stories from who I believe are reliable people. But I mean, I think often people who are going to talk to the press publicly, they have an agenda, right? Maybe they have other people on the campaign who they want to take out, or change something with leadership. So I always think definitely take with a grain of salt when you're reading these more palace intrigue, inside baseball stories. But campaigns are always a little bit chaotic. I think that's, you pointed out before, they're almost always like startups, and especially somebody like RFK, who was, I mean, I believe a first-time candidate, or at least a first-time presidential candidate. So he doesn't have major infrastructure, and he probably, he started out with people, probably a handful of people he trusts, but then it kind of balloons from there. So I think I've heard some chaos, but it is a campaign. So
Interesting. So you've heard some people that have said it's a little chaotic in there.
Yeah, I mean,
but more than is normal. I mean, obviously these campaigns, I mean, it seems like it would just have to be almost controlled chaos, because think about what you're doing. It's crazy. You're trying to get almost
the craziest thing you could do. No, I think to your point, I mean, I think that there are stories right now, right, about Trump campaign being incredibly disciplined, and that's completely different from 2016.
Yes.
Even, I mean, some of the top leaders on that campaign were saying, like, we couldn't even collude with ourselves, much less collude with Russia. So, I mean, I don't think, obviously, you don't want an operation that's hair on fire every day. That's not healthy for the principal. That's not healthy for the staff. That's not helpful for turnover and longevity. That being said, it comes with the territory. So, I mean, do I think Kennedy's going to win? No. Do I think he has the ability to change the conversation or change the course of the election? I do. I think that he's best suited to do that if he can probably get that campaign under wraps, and that also means lacking no leaks. Actually, something we were blessed to not really have a problem with on the Vivek campaign, but that's trust is incredibly important in those organizations, so that you don't create information silos, which then create more resentment. So how do you do that? You really got to root out those leakers.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you guys didn't have that, at least not that I remember. And that's interesting, because like you said, this is like sort of a palace intrigue story. It's almost a genre of political stories around presidential campaigns. I remember, like you're talking about, there were so many of them in 2016, even before election day. I just remember reading the New York Times and Bloomberg talking about how he had no ground game, and how, there's no way he's going to win, no matter how much people like him or how well he polls, just because they don't know what they're doing. But he won, so how did you guys avoid that at Vivek's campaign?
I mean, we definitely just tried to hire people with integrity. I think that's partially what it's about. We had a pretty lean team, so I think that probably, if you eliminate the bloat, you're probably going to eliminate that risk quite a bit. But I mean, you can't have any tolerance for it. But that also starts at the top. You can't have, if you've got your most senior staff leaking, then it's going to trickle down. So I think you got to lead from the top.
Yeah.
And that includes the candidate themselves, by the way, because
right.
God knows there's a lot who do.
Yeah. Who leak themselves, right? I feel like didn't Trump do some of that too in 2016? Wasn't he? Or maybe not 2016, but prior to, he was himself a leak or whatever, a source for stories about himself over the years, I think. I'm curious about just the morale inside of a campaign too. Did you guys do anything to keep morale up? Did you have like karaoke nights? Did you have like getaway? I mean, you said you're traveling, you're working 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. Is it all work, or is there some fun in there too to try to keep people from doing that sort of stuff, from any resentment that might exist from it building, or
Yeah, I think that's something honestly we could have done a better job at, as far as like Vivek is a total workhorse and I give him total credit for that. But I think that we had a culture of all work and little play. And I think, of course, people need breaks. But I think so often when people got a break, they're like, I want to go hang out with my husband or wife or, dog. So, I think, of course, we had, we had your occasional like happy hour or bowling night. And by the end of the campaign, we had all moved to Iowa. So, that definitely, creates a culture of closeness. We had this craziest of blizzards. I think it was like a 7 day.
I remember that.
But you're all, we were driving in vans together, getting stuck on the side of the road together. It definitely builds camaraderie sometimes. It was tough times sometimes, but.
Okay, so that's fascinating. You guys were all in Iowa. You said you moved to Iowa. In a hotel? Where are you living? In like some sort of corporate housing, like temporary apartments?
It was kind of scattered across the board. So some people were in hotels, some people were in like Airbnb situations, some people were in, temporary housing. I total credit to our operations team who like made that all happen, because it was probably 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. We were kind of looking at internal polling and saying it's kind of like Iowa or bust. You have this huge behemoth in Donald Trump, and if you can't show momentum at the very beginning, then it's bust. And I think that that's exactly kind of what happened across the board for the candidates, right? Ron DeSantis dropped out after Iowa, not performing exactly how he wanted to. Nikki Haley, of course, went through New Hampshire and South Carolina, but that's just 3 states. So I think with such a front runner, you have to really show momentum at the beginning. So we kind of put all our eggs in the Iowa basket. And of course, Vivek is kind of not your typical candidate who would excel in Iowa, as far as he's not a Christian, he's Hindu, and he has kind of a different background that I think your traditional presidential candidate who would do well in Iowa does. But that was the plan, and that's the way the electoral system works.
And I remember the blizzard going on, or days of snow in a row, multiple days, I think right around maybe even on the caucus day, right?
Yeah, on caucus day, pretty much the whole entire week before. it transformed really that last part of the campaign. I don't think I've ever, sounds very dramatic, but walking from my hotel to just get my car, I didn't have gloves. And I'm pretty sure I had frostbite. Like, it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. I'm from Ohio, so I would like to think I have some kind of thick skin.
You know what cold is, yeah.
I know, that's right. But yeah, it was, it was kind of interesting though, too. By the end of that, that week, everyone's kind of stuck inside. And that includes all of the other campaigns who are, stuck in Des Moines, a blizzard-ridden Des Moines, Iowa. So you're seeing a bunch of, the rival campaigns sitting inside at different hotels working. It's just, it's almost like high school. It's
but I do remember I was surprised how much you guys were making it places. You seemed to be showing up. You seemed, from the outside looking in, it really seemed like the weather was not affecting your ability to get around. But you said you got stuck on the road in some case, on the side of the road.
Yeah, I definitely did. And I know a handful of other people did as well. It was inevitable. Vivek, he wanted to this was the most important day that we would have of the campaign, and ultimately, right, be the very end of it. So he wanted to plow through, no pun intended, and he did. And total credit to our staff. And his wife would show up at the, like, because a trip that would take 45 minutes would take 4 hours, right? Just based on the speed of the ability to get there. So credit to his wife, Apoorva. She took, I think, 2 weeks off of, she's a surgeon. She took 2
Yeah.
weeks off to go travel, and she, not with him, she would go to the stops he couldn't make it to, so that these people who showed up still could at least meet Apoorva. And so it was definitely an all-out effort.
Yeah, that's great. And they have 2 young kids too, so that can't.
The kids were off the road. I mean, it was just, that's
Sure, but just the fact that, you still, wherever wherever your kids are, you're still managing them from a distance and so forth.
completely. Total credit to them as parents too. My gosh.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, you guys did a tremendous job from what it looked like just as an observer. I thought you guys accomplished some amazing things, and Vivek was a really interesting candidate, and really, I thought, shook things up, and in a good way.
He did. He never shied away from saying what he believed, and I give him total credit for that. And like I said before, you can't run for president if you are not afraid of a little controversy, and he wasn't, and he didn't back down from it. So I give him total kudos.
Yeah, he seemed to walk headlong into it at some points, and that was good. And he was not scared of it, and didn't he didn't back down when at other points when people, other candidates might have not been able to stay strong. He certainly did. All right, let's talk about one more thing. I know we're almost out of time here. I saw that you wrote, this is a little bit more than a year ago, you wrote an opinion column for the Columbus Dispatch. And I thought it was interesting because you talked in the column, you talked about, and it was really pegged to a poll that had just come out recently about how Americans in general, and really within all these age demographics, are not proud to be American anymore. And this is in February 2023, you wrote this. And you just, cited some numbers that I guess was a Morning Consult poll, I think, showing that something like only 38% of adults said they were extremely proud to be an American. And you sort of connected this to the lack of American symbolism, the flag, people not really showing much pride in the flag or displaying the flag anymore. And so you wrote that back then. And I'm curious now, we're right in May, and for the last 2 weeks, or roughly 2 weeks or so, there have been all over the US on some big college campuses, all these protests, people protesting the situation in Gaza. And so I'm wondering, what do you make of this? Has it gotten worse since you wrote that column, which isn't that long ago, like I said?
Yeah, I don't know if it's gotten worse, or if it's that it's so startling to see it so out in the open, and people are so willing to say death to America or death to Israel. Yeah, I mean, it's almost prescient that I think maybe I wrote that in February 2022. It was definitely a long time ago. I haven't read that piece in a long time, but it actually speaks to a lot of, this is before I even knew anything about really Vivek would be running for president or his platform or anything, but it actually speaks to a lot of what he talks about, which is that people do hunger for purpose and meaning and identity. And so often we find that identity and that meaning in our religion or in our country. And if you don't bend, if you're not going to salute our flag, you so often will salute someone else's. And I think that that's what we're seeing a lot of. I mean, kids who would never, wear an American flag, or, would probably kneel for the national anthem, are proudly waving Palestinian flags. And these countries and regimes that have horrendous human rights records against women, against gay people, just across the board, do not value human life. And yet these students are so proud to back them and defend them, even though it's almost crazy to see, if these people, do they reflect at all on how they would be treated if they were to be in those countries, and that they in no way, shape, or form would they be allowed to protest the way they are because of the men and women who fought and died for their right to say it, for their right to say, I hate America. So I think maybe it's just that it's more stark and startling to see it with our own eyes and to see it on camera and not just envision in classrooms and dorm halls kind of the hatred towards this country.
It's so interesting you point out the stuff about the flags and people being so ready to like wave flags for other countries, other people, whatever, but yet still be so put off by their own flag. One thing that was crazy though, and I'm not sure what you think of this, is within all of that, there were I thought some positive signs of like these kids, these fraternity boys down in, I think it was UNC. And as a matter of fact, it was Pi Kappa Phi fraternity. And I have to say that because I was a member of Pi Kappa Phi when I was in college many years ago. So these kids came and they protected the flag from being pulled down out of the flagpole. They put it back up, and then they like broke into the national anthem. I mean, what do you think about that? On one level, yeah, it is shocking, and to see it with, on social media and all the media coverage. But on another hand, isn't it pretty like inspiring to see that there are some kids out there who like get up and still do, defend the country, or at least the symbols of the country?
I think that there is a silver lining. It's like when we see that, it's like the kids are all right. So I read an interesting article about kind of there being this gender divide in Gen Z as far as across patriotic lines and across political lines as well. And I think that that's kind of, I don't know if I necessarily ascribe to it, but that was kind of something interesting that I think we've been seeing these past few weeks. And I do hope that, parents now, as they're getting ready to send, maybe their seniors in high school potentially to college or whatever their next step is, I think it's worth us all reflecting on what are we willing to let our children or ourselves be indoctrinated by.
I totally hear what you're saying there. I just think too, though, that those kids, like, and who knows what their motivation was. I haven't really seen any interviews. I saw a couple of them tweet and post some stuff on Twitter saying that they couldn't stand to see like their flag being treated that way and other flags being celebrated and so forth. But just to step up and do that, I don't know. I thought it was pretty admirable. But again, it's not everywhere too. And you know what? There was one other situation too in New York City when the cop went and replaced the flag. I think there was a Palestinian flag that had been put up, and he took it down and replaced it with an American flag. And it was really interesting because then New York City's Mayor Eric Adams got up on TV and talked about that and like praised the cop for doing that, which is, for him, that's actually saying something because we know some of his policies. You and I were talking before you got on about what New York City's like right now. Even him, that was like a bridge too far.
Yeah. I thought that was his best moment as mayor. And he said, like, we fought and my relatives fought and died for this flag. And
that's our flag, folks. Don't take over our buildings and put another flag up. That may be fine to other people, but it's not to me. My uncle died defending this country, and these men and women put their lives on the line. And it's despicable that schools will allow another country flag to fly in our country. So blame me for being proud to be an American. And I thank Commissioner Daughtry for putting that flag back up. We're not surrendering our way of life to anyone.
It should make us proud to be Americans.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Tricia, it's been great talking with you. Before we do wrap it up, though, tell me social media plugs. You said you launched a new firm. Does it have a name? Can people find it?
Yes, they can't find it yet because I have not launched the website, but it's coming soon. It's called Insurgent Strategies. And yeah, Twitter at Tricia Ohio and Instagram too.
And you know what? Actually, it occurs to me, I forgot to ask you too. On Instagram, now that you say Instagram, you had written about 2023 being a bizarre year, very bizarre year, I think was your quote. What was so bizarre about it?
I never was envisioning myself on a presidential campaign, much less at, the basement level of it. And it was, a year of total twists and turns, professionally, and lots of opportunity and lots of learning. And so I think bizarre but grateful is probably the best way to describe 2023.
But good. Overall, you enjoyed it though,
Great.
you're saying?
Yeah. I wouldn't take it back.
Yeah. Good experience, it seems like to me. Well, listen, thank you again. Really, it was great talking to you. You're such an interesting person, and nothing but, I wish you good luck with the new firm, Insurgent Strategies, right? That's the name?
Strategies, yes.
Cool, cool. Very cool. Well, thanks for coming on, Tricia. Good talking to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Great talking to you.
Yep.